Up next on Camera Labs, Gordon and I review the Fujifilm XT2. Hi, this is Doug Kay. I'm here on Camera Labs, and I'm here with Mr. Camera Labs himself, Gordon Lang. Hello, Gordon. How are you today?
I'm very good, Doug. How are you?
I'm doing very well. We're going to dive right in today to a new camera we've been waiting for 2.5 years, the upgrade to the Fujifilm XT1. It is the XT2. Tell us about it.
Yes, not the XT1 Mark II, but the XT2. It's a significant enough upgrade that they actually changed the number. People don't do that so much in cameras these days, do they? It's always the Mark II, the Mark III.
Well, each vendor has its own thing, don't they? Fujifilm, I don't think they have any Mark IIs. They will change the end. They'll add a 2 or a 1, or they'll change the S to a T, something like that, right?
Yeah. So this is the XT2. If you're watching the video rather than listening to the podcast, you'll see the XT2. And this is now the joint flagship in the Fujifilm X series, joint with the X Pro 2. Both of them are high-end mirrorless cameras with APS-C sensors. They both share quite a lot in common. The XT2 inherits quite a few of the technologies and upgrades that made their debut on the X Pro 2. So they both share the same 24-megapixel APS-C sensor. That's Fujifilm's latest X Trans 3 with its broader array of embedded phase detect AF points. Both of them have 1/8,000th of a second mechanical shutters. Both of them have AF joysticks, which are fantastic for moving that single AF area around. You don't need to configure anything. That's all it does, unless you do want to change it. They also both have dual SD memory card slots, which has become a kind of standard feature now, I'm pleased to say, on what would be classed as high-end, semi-professional, professional cameras. The reason you want dual memory card slots is to have a backup as you go along. You could record the same images to both cards, hand one to a client, or just have that reassurance that should one card corrupt, you've always got the other one. You could record JPEG to one, RAW to the other. You could also just have one set up as an overflow. I've done that when I've been merrily shooting lots of action shots, and when one card filled, it just automatically switched over to the other. So dual memory card slots, a nice upgrade shared by both of those bodies. And they both share the same Fujifilm image processor, which now supports the Acros film simulation. Now, regular viewers and visitors to Camera Labs will know that I'm a very big fan, I think Doug is as well, of the out-of-camera JPEG quality on the Fujifilm bodies. It just produces JPEGs that are great to go without any modification, and Acros is a fantastic addition to that arsenal because it produces really nice high contrast black and white images. And if you follow me on Instagram, Camera Labs, where I post all my own personal work, you'll see that I do a lot of Acros pictures with these cameras, and they just look really nice. You don't need to do anything else to them, and that's the thing I really like here. What do you think, Doug?
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, we've talked about this many times. I think the Fujifilm cameras are probably those with the best out-of-camera JPEGs of any of the cameras that we review, whether it's mirrorless or DSLR. The JPEGs are terrific. The film simulations are spectacular, as you point out. And if you don't want to shoot RAW, if you really want to shoot just JPEG and deal with the images straight out of camera, the Fujifilm line, the whole line is really excellent.
Yeah, I should also say that I do shoot RAW with these cameras, but I rarely, if ever, process them on a computer. I do, however, process them within the camera itself. Like most modern cameras, in the playback menus, you actually have RAW processing facilities. And it's great because you can change the film simulation, go from, say, black and white to color or back and forth, slightly push those files, make them a little bit brighter or a little bit darker, tweak them in ways that are certainly more than sufficient to achieve the result that I want. I should also say that one of the other differences that this camera has in common with the X Pro 2, a considered upgrade, is that the dials on the front and back are now pushable, push to click, like we've seen on some Panasonic cameras as well. They feel much better to me. And in fact, I'm going to launch straight into this and say, before I go on about the unique differences of the XT2, as an existing XT1 owner, one of the biggest upgrades for me overall is the kind of overall feel and handling of this camera. And it's something that's easy to overlook when you become slightly obsessed with features and specifications and performance, because you could have a camera that ticks all the boxes in terms of features. It could deliver the best image quality in the world. But if it doesn't feel good in your hands and it just doesn't kind of feel right, the buttons don't feel good to you, the dials don't click the way you'd like them, then it's not a camera that you're going to enjoy shooting with. Now, I enjoyed shooting with the XT1 a lot. I thought it was a very attractive camera. The XT2 inherits those good looks. But they've done a lot of little tweaks. So I'm just going to mention those now. You'll see the dials on the top, the dedicated ISO and shutter speed dials, are now taller than before. That makes them easier to turn, then easier to get hold of. They've also got little kind of ballpoint pen buttons in the middle that lock them or unlock them so that you can prevent them from turning. The buttons on the rear, the 4 cross keys on the rear, were always a big bugbear for me on the XT1 because they were too flush. You could hardly really feel when you were pushing them. Now on the XT2, they are bigger. They feel much better. Not as good as they could be. Ironically, on the X Pro 2, they're even nicer. I think those rear buttons are lovely, but it's a step in the right direction. Similarly, these push-to-click dials, the AF joystick, an enormous upgrade because I love repositioning a single AF area. I should put that on a T-shirt instead of Camera Labs and the AeroPress. I love repositioning a single AF area. And I just wish all cameras had an AF joystick, plus another feature that we're going to talk about later. But so overall, and a slightly kind of boosted grip as well. Oh, and a threaded cable release as well. These little kind of physical tweaks that show that Fujifilm is paying attention to the ergonomics and the handling as well as the new features, which we're going to come on to next. How do you, when you pick up these bodies, Doug, what do you think of them? Especially Fujifilm's approach of not having a mode dial, but having separate shutter speed and aperture rings.
Well, these are exactly my preference. I love the kind of controls that Fuji has. My Leica Q is very similar in that they have, dedicated aperture rings. They have a shutter speed dial. They have ISO selection or exposure compensation selection. Cameras that you don't have to go into the menus to use. You don't have to get into the menus very often, let's say that. And that everything is very intuitive. You can basically put your aperture on A for automatic. You can put your shutter on A for automatic. And you don't have the, I don't really want to call it a traditional PASM dial, because if you go back to film days, there was no such dial. But the idea of program aperture priority, shutter priority manual, this is something that's shared by most DSLRs, even most mirrorless, but the Leica Q, the Fujifilm lines have these, what I would call, more traditional type controls. Hey, while we're talking about these two cameras, though, I think it's interesting. We have probably a few classes of viewers and listeners today. We probably have people who have the XT1 and are wondering, should I upgrade? We probably have people who are considering the XT2 versus the X Pro 2 and try to understand the difference. And then there are the people who are looking for a new camera, who have never had a Fuji camera before, and they're saying, why would I want it? So let me ask you this. Let's first look a little more deeply into the XT2 versus the X Pro 2. Let me point out that these are not inexpensive cameras. The XT2 retails in the US for $1,599, $1,599. The X Pro 2 is $100 more, $1,699. So spend just a moment, a little more time on the difference between these two cameras. I noticed, by the way, that this camera, I didn't just notice, I knew this, it has a hump in the middle. It looks a bit like a small DSLR, doesn't it?
Okay, well, you already know about what they have in common, like the sensor and the AF, a lot of those technologies. What kind of really differs between them is the physical styling, and in particular the composition. As you noted there, the XT series, whether it's an XT1, an XT2, an XT10, hopefully they'll do an XT20 in the future, a kind of budget model. They have a centrally located viewfinder hump, very much like a DSLR with an optical viewfinder would. There's no reason why an electronic viewfinder has to be in the middle. It can go anywhere it wants. All you do is move the wire. Obviously, in a DSLR, it has to be in line with the optical path, or, you could have mirrors, I guess, bouncing it sideways. Some of them did. But I digress. With an electronic viewfinder, you can put it anywhere. But Fujifilm, the XT series, decided to put it in the middle. It's a very traditional look that we're familiar with from DSLRs and film SLRs. And frankly, I think it's a very attractive look. I do prefer centrally located viewfinder humps. That's T-shirt number 2. Now, it's only electronic composition on the XT2, as you'd expect for a mirrorless camera. And this viewfinder image is enormous. I mean, absolutely vast. If you're coming from a full-frame DSLR with its optical viewfinder, you may think that your viewfinder is delivering a big image. But that's peanuts compared to what cameras like the XT2 and the XT1 before it can do. That image, when you switch between them, because I was testing the XT2 at the same time as the Canon 5D Mark IV, which is also not a cheap camera, but you're looking at probably over $3,000 for that. It's a full frame body. And yet the viewfinder image on this, the XT2, is larger. It's more immersive. There are, of course, pros and cons that we can talk about later or another time. But in terms of size, it's very, very big. But it's electronic only. Now, the X Pro 2 has this particularly innovative viewfinder technology. It has an electronic viewfinder, although the image is not quite as big as you get on the XT2, but it also has a kind of optical rangefinder type view where you're actually looking through lenses and seeing what's right in front of you. The beauty of that is that there's instant feedback. And if you've never used one of these type of viewfinders before, you'll see a frame inside that represents what you're going to capture. And the clever thing about Fujifilm, the way they do it on the X Pro 2 and on the X100 series, is the frame is not permanently etched onto some glass or plastic. It's actually a digital overlay that can move and adjust for parallax depending on what you're focusing on. So it's very, very smart. But what it lets you do is see beyond the frame. So if you're into street photography and you're seeing somebody interesting walking along, well, let's put it this way. Let's say you've framed up this really cool composition. You know, you've got this interesting sign. You're just waiting for someone interesting to walk underneath it, right? Well, with a normal viewfinder, you've got to wait until they're in the frame already before you'll see them. But with a rangefinder style viewfinder, like on the X Pro series, you can see them before they enter the frame. And it just gives you that extra time to be prepared for it. But what it does mean, though, is that because the magnification of this actual window doesn't vary, if you put a longer and longer and longer lens on it, a telephoto lens or a longer lens, what happens is the frames that indicate what you're going to capture get smaller and smaller and smaller. And once you get to like 135 mil equivalent, let alone 200 or 300 or 400, you're dealing with this tiny little frame in the middle. And you're like, ooh, I can hardly see that. So that's when on the X Pro series you'd switch back to the electronic viewfinder. You kind of switch between them. But it does already suggest the kind of photographer that's going to like the X Pro series as opposed to the XT series. Street photographers, people like you, Doug, you're a great street photographer. I think you would probably prefer the X Pro series to the XT series for that reason. You've got that hybrid viewfinder. It works really well with Fujifilm's kind of mid-focal length lenses. So we're talking about equivalent lenses to, say, 35 to 85. Very comfortable in that range. Go much wider, you're not going to see it all. Go much longer, you're going to have a tiny frame. The screen on the back of the X Pro 2 is also fixed in position. It does not move. So in contrast, the XT series has got a bigger electronic-only viewfinder, but that means that it's great for adapting to ultra-wide lenses or extreme telephoto lenses. And it also has an articulated screen. And that actually leads me on to one of the unique new features of the XT2, which is the screen articulation. Now, I like screens that are fully articulated, hinged at the side so I can flip them out and twist them to any direction. It's great because you can face them back to face you when you're filming pieces to camera or doing self-portraits. You can flap them back on themselves for protection. Let me show you how Fujifilm does it because it's completely unique. So as before, you can, and if you're just listening to the podcast, I'm holding the camera in the landscape horizontal orientation. So the screen flips out vertically to point straight up by 90 degrees, or you can angle it down by about 45 degrees for shooting over the heads of crowds. So you can do waist level or over the heads. But of course, as again, regular viewers to Camera Labs and our podcast will know, that doesn't help you when you're shooting, as I do, in the portrait orientation, when the camera's on its side, this tall shape, unless you're shooting round corners. But so what Fujifilm have done is they've got an additional kind of little switch, little lever on the side. I'm going to show it to the camera for those who are watching. And what this lets you do, if you push it up, you do have to push it up, you can now flip the screen out like this. Do you see that, Doug?
Yeah.
So it's going up by about a bit more than 45 degrees. It doesn't go all the way to 90 degrees, but believe me, it makes it a lot easier to shoot with this camera at a low angle or at a high angle when you're shooting in the portrait or tall orientation. Now, I spoke to Fujifilm about this and they said, look, why didn't you just do a side hinge screen? And there are several reasons, and one of them, which is quite good, it doesn't get in the way of L brackets. It doesn't make the body thicker. But here's the cool thing. It is just a one-step process. Now, if you have a side hinge screen, it's always a two-step process. As you flip it out and twist it. And that slows you down. Video shooters don't like that. They like these vertically tilting screens because they just go flip and they're ready to go. And in the same way, people who are shooting in the portrait can just go flip in one motion and you're good to go. So I wasn't sure at first, but I'm at peace with this now. What do you think of this mechanism?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't actually held the camera, so I can't be sure. I tend to like the fully articulated screen just because I'm used to it. This is a little bit unusual, but I imagine I could get used to it.
Now, should we get it out of the way right now and say that this screen is still not touch sensitive?
We should get that out of the way because I know the reason people tune in and watch our podcast is to find out, does the camera have a touch sensitive screen? That's the most important thing, isn't it?
It is. Welcome to touchsensitivecamerascreens.com, where unfortunately the XT2 does not tick that box. I wish it did. Fujifilm will go, it doesn't need a touchscreen. It's got an AF joystick. That is true. When you are composing stills through the viewfinder, the AF joystick works a treat. Your thumb naturally falls over it. You can move that AF area. Everything works well. Even when you're composing with the screen. Sure, tapping the screen would be easier and quicker, but you can still push the joystick. But where it really does miss out, for me, is video. Now, if you want to pull focus from one area to another, that's where you're refocusing from something that's distant to near or vice versa. It is so nice on the cameras with touchscreens to be able to just tap that screen and in one go, tell it to focus not on there, but on there. It's so simple. On the XT2, though, you can shift the single AF area while you're filming with the joystick, and it will pull focus. But you're going tap, 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 tap. Each time you touch the camera when you're filming, you run the risk of hearing a click. You run the risk of wobbling the camera. And, of course, because the autofocus system within the phase detect area is very responsive on this camera, it also runs the risk of refocusing on a point in between as you move the AF area from one subject to another. All of these things could be resolved with a touch screen, and Fujifilm have proven that they can do it. They had it on the X70, didn't they? And I wish they had it on this camera. And they're becoming unusual in this respect because Sony, which was also the other exception, now has it on the A6500. Olympus and Panasonic, of course, have had it forever. Canon has it on. Canon is putting it on almost everything now, but it's on the 5D Mark IV and on the 80D. Nikon has got it on the D500, and so on. Suddenly Fujifilm is looking a little bit out in the cold here in terms of touch screens. I wish it had it. For me, that is the big failing of this camera, but that's not much of a failing.
I know, but it's one of those little nits that we like to pick. That's for sure. Hey, Gordon, you hinted at video, so let's talk about what's new in video in this camera.
Okay, the X-T2 becomes the first Fuji X series body to film 4K video. Now, because it has the same sensor and I believe the same image processor as the X Pro 2, this, of course, suggests that the X Pro 2 could also shoot 4K video. And I believe technically the sensor and processor are capable of doing it, but they didn't implement that feature on the X Pro 2 because they didn't think that street shooters, the target audience, would be that interested in it. And before you think it's something they could add in the firmware update, bear in mind that 4K video is pretty demanding, does make your camera run quite hot, so it may physically not be optimized for filming. So I wouldn't expect the X Pro 2 to get 4K in an update, but the X-T2 can do it. And here's the thing, Fujifilm was never amazing at video, and on the X-Trans 2 sensors, its 1080p video, it was okay, but it wasn't anything to get excited about. But with X-Trans 3 and the latest image processor, they've made massive leaps and bounds in image quality, and the video performance on it is really very, very good in 4K. There's also a mild crop, I think it's 1.17 times crop. I've got sample upon sample upon sample and comparisons at cameralabs.com if you want to check that out. One of the more interesting comparisons you should look at in the movie mode section of my review of this camera is a video I filmed actually about the 5D Mark IV's features. And when I was testing the 5D Mark IV, the interesting thing about that camera is that it may be full frame, but when it's filming 4K, it takes a 1-to-1 crop. And because it starts off with a 30 megapixel image, that's quite a severe crop to get down to the roughly 8 megapixels that you need for 4K video. And the size that it crops is actually roughly APS-C. So I thought, wait a minute, if it's only using an APS-C portion of the sensor, let's compare it to the Fujifilm XT2, which is an APS-C camera, and the Sony a6300, and see how they perform. And you know what? Very, very, very similar in quality. So if you were thinking about getting a 5D Mark IV because it's got this full-frame sensor, that's great. But if you're thinking about getting it to have superior 4K video, you may not be getting that. You will be getting a big body that dissipates heat nicely, but you won't be getting much quality benefit, or really any quality benefit, over the X-T2. So Fujifilm should be commended for that. I mean, they've made such great improvements in quality. And also, like, the early X-T1 only had a 2.5mm jack for the microphone, which means you always had an adapter. They've changed that to 3.5mm. They've also put a headphone jack on the optional battery grip that I do want to talk a lot about later on. So that, you know, they've thought a lot about video. What the video doesn't have, which is a little bit annoying, is if you are into professional video, you do like grading your footage afterwards. And Fujifilm going, well, you can apply any film simulation to even 4K video. You could have Acros, Velvia, Provia, Astia, Classic Chrome. And it's true, they look great. The video footage looks great out of camera, but some people still like to grade their own footage. And to do that, they need a flat log profile. Now, Fujifilm does have an F-log profile, but it's only supported when you're squirting video out of the HDMI port. Oh, and I should say it does squirt 4K out of the HDMI, so you can connect it to an external recorder. But it won't record F-log to an internal SD card. Not because it's technically not possible, but because they thought nobody wanted it. Well, I want it, and I think lots of people would. So if enough have asked for it, I think they will hopefully be able to implement that in a firmware update. There is, in fact, already a firmware update for this body that allows you to tether it over USB to Lightroom and Photoshop. So they are listening. They are adding these features. So the video is great on it. I just wish it had a touch screen for easier focus pulling.
Yeah, we should point out also that historically, Fujifilm has been a company that probably more than any others listens to its customers. They've provided more enhancements through firmware updates than almost anybody else I can think of. I think a lot of people who have had Fuji cameras for a number of years have a camera that's now substantially better than the one they purchased. They're very good in that regard.
Yeah, the X-T1 had an amazing firmware upgrade to improve autofocus, and we can go on to that straight away. But before we do that, I just want to show you the ports on the side, so you can see that 3.5mm microphone jack. But if you are a port nerd, you will notice that this USB port is a USB 3 port. Can you see that, Doug, on the video?
Yeah, absolutely.
A USB 3. So that's interesting. That allows it to handle higher data rates, which is great for the tethering. But in a really nice upgrade, the X-T2 becomes the first interchangeable lens X series body that can be USB charged. So you can charge it over this. You will, of course, need a USB 3 cable, but I've successfully charged this with one of my big Anker USB batteries or via the laptop. You can't power it over USB. As soon as you turn the camera on, it stops charging. It stops accepting the power through that port, but you can recharge it. So I'm so pleased to see that. But traditionalists will be happy to be told that it does also come with an AC separate charging unit.
You know, one thing, you mentioned the fact that it has 2 SD slots. I think from reading your extensive review over at cameralabs.com that they're not identical, right? One of them
they are.
Oh, they are?
They are. They are.
Okay.
On the X-T2 they are, but on the X Pro 2 they're not. So on the X-T2 they are both compatible with UHS Class 2. I don't have a UHS Class 2 card, so I wasn't able to exploit that extra speed. Although that said, with UHS Class 1 cards, I still achieved the quoted buffer rates. So, you know, that certainly didn't hold me back using UHS Class 1. But the X Pro 2, only one of those slots was UHS Class 2. The other one was UHS Class 1. And that's something to look out for when you're looking at these dual slots, you know, because it's a feature that you're seeing on more and more cameras. So look a little deeper and find out, you know, what's the spec on both of them. And some cameras use different formats, like Canon on the 5D Mark IV, one of them is compact flash. Nikon likes using XQD, stuff like that. But like Olympus also with the EM1 Mark II, that is dual SD as well. So, you know, it's interesting to look at the way different manufacturers are doing it. But I love that it's become a feature now, a common feature.
Yeah, it's interesting because these things are unusual and worth noting in some cameras, and then a few years down the road, they're in every camera. So it's interesting to see that. Let's go back to the still photography a bit. A couple of things about the frame rate. How fast can this shoot? How many frames per second? The bracketing, the image stabilization. Does it have image stabilization?
Let's talk about image stabilization straight away. It does not have built-in image stabilization. So if you want to iron out the wobbles with this camera, like all Fujifilm X bodies, you will need a lens with optical stabilization. They do have a few. Most of them are zooms, but most of them do not have optical stabilization. And for me, this is a problem because I do shake quite a lot. I drink a lot of coffee, so I do shake. And it's all very well saying, well, just use a faster shutter speed. You know, the high ISO performance on this camera is very good. So just stick it at 1600 or 3200 ISO until you've got a fast enough shutter to avoid camera shake. That's fine, except you can't do that with video. And you also can't compose as easily as you can with a stabilized system. Because when you're shooting with telephotos, I mean, I like doing geometrically very square pictures. I like everything to be very symmetrical, everything to be absolutely straight. And that is just infinitely easier with a stabilized system because the image is floating and you can just make very fine adjustments until it's absolutely right. Now, when you're shooting with a telephoto lens, a much longer lens, and it's not stabilized, that picture's wobbling all over the place. You know, you might not notice it so much when you're shooting portraits, but when you're shooting a landscape or in particular architecture and you think, I want that brick or I want that architectural feature to be pushed up into the corner or in exactly that point, it becomes increasingly harder at longer focal lengths. Now, again, as far as I understand it, built-in stabilization is not going to be possible on an X series body because of the way they designed the mount. There simply isn't enough room for that sensor to move about. By luck or chance or design, I don't know, Sony managed to squeeze it into both its full frame and crop T mount. It's now available on the A6500, has built-in stabilization. And in a similar way to the touchscreen conversation we had earlier, suddenly what used to be a feature that was pretty much exclusive to Olympus and to some Sony bodies has now become almost, prevalent in the industry. So now you can get very good built-in stabilization, obviously from Olympus. It's becoming very good on Panasonic's latest bodies. Sony has now got it on its APS-C and full-frame bodies. And you get into this point where in the mirrorless camp, Fujifilm is about the only one that doesn't have it. So in the mirrorless cameras, Fuji is the only one now that doesn't have a body with built-in image stabilization and a body with a touchscreen. So these are two features that, the two strikes against the XT2. And unfortunately, while Fuji can fit a touchscreen in the future to a future model, I hope to be proven wrong, but I don't think they will be able to implement built-in stabilization. So that's always going to be a limitation of the X series, which is a shame. I mean, on the other hand, you've got to look at the system as a whole. And whenever I test some Micro Four Thirds lenses, optically they're stunning, but there's some really expensive Micro Four Thirds lenses now. And just out of curiosity, I compared some of them to the Fujifilm equivalents, and the Fujifilm lenses were kind of roughly matching them in quality, but at a much lower price. And lest we forget, with a slightly bigger sensor behind them. So it's frustrating that Fuji's got this really nice system with quite affordable lenses considering the quality, but yet this feature that is unlikely to ever be implemented. Do you think that's going to hold them back?
Well, I was going to ask you, you know the product line much better than I do. Do the longer focal length lenses in the Fuji line tend to have lens-based optical image stabilization?
Yeah, the zooms do. I mean, I shot a lot, and we'll talk about autofocus and continuous shooting next. I shot a lot with the XF 50 to 140 mm 2.8. That's optically stabilized, and the 100 to 400, that's optically stabilized. So that's not an issue. But even with the 56 mm prime, which works out about 85, and the 90 mm, once you get to those kind of focal lengths and they're not stabilized, I personally find it quite hard to compose with those because I'm seeing visible movement in the viewfinder. Your mileage may vary. Like I say, I do shake quite a lot. So, but again, the video, it's so nice to have stabilization for video and to adapt to the lenses and things. That is something that this won't be able to do as well.
You've made me think of something I hadn't thought of before. I tend to not use particularly slow shutter speeds. So image stabilization for me is rarely an important feature. But as you point out, something I hadn't thought of is if you're using the longer focal length, even if your shutter speed is high, being able to use image stabilization for composing your image is a great feature. And I hadn't actually thought of that before. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and it really brought it home to me when I was kind of living with the Olympus OMD EM1, which was my go-to camera for many years, and I still love that camera. And I was shooting, especially with prime lenses like the Olympus 75mm 1.8, lovely lens equivalent to 150mm. So that's quite a, it's not a super telephoto, is it? It's not a wildlife telephoto, but for kind of architectural portraiture, it's getting on the long side. And it's just so nice to see that image just stop. It just stops dead. You could be wobbling, you could be in a really difficult, uncomfortable situation, but it's just rock steady. And at the wide end of things, you can put a wide lens on it and handhold pictures at 1 second or even 2 seconds at, say, 24mm equivalent. And these features really changed the way that I take pictures. So, when I switched from, say, Olympus to Fuji between these systems, because they are my two favorite systems, I have to remember that camera shake could be an issue either during composition or during capture as well. I have to be aware of that when I'm shooting with the Fuji.
So go back and tell me now about the frame rate and the bracketing.
Okay, so the bracketing is an easy one to cover right now. Strangely, does this camera have 9-frame AEB, 7-frame? No. 5-frame? No. It has 3-frame auto exposure bracketing, which to me is inexplicable on a camera of this price point. Why would they just put 3-frame AEB on it? And it's been something that's on all these Fujifilm bodies. I've mentioned this to Fujifilm, and they've gone, "Oh, is that a big deal? Okay, yeah, we can probably address that in a firmware update." So hopefully they will do that. So I've got that out of the way now. So if you're an HDR fanatic, I am not. But if you are, be aware that it only has 3-frame AEB at the moment. Hopefully that will improve. So moving on to continuous shooting, and this is a difference with the X Pro 2. The XT2 can shoot with a mechanical shutter at 8 frames per second. Let's hear how that sounds. I'm going to put this next to my microphone. Can you hear that?
Yes, I can.
So that's shooting at 8 frames per second with the mechanical shutter. It also has an electronic shutter on it, like most mirrorless cameras now. And this is worth mentioning because this is something that DSLR still can't do. It allows it to shoot not only at a much faster shutter speed, so it can go not just to 8,000, but to, I think it's 32,000 per second. But it also lets you shoot in complete silence, which a DSLR can't, even in live view. I mean complete silence. Yeah, there's just the tiniest click of maybe the aperture adjustment, but it's great when you're shooting, say, in a church for a quiet wedding and stuff, or in a library or whatever. But it also allows this camera to increase its continuous shooting rate to 14 frames per second. So I'm going to talk about the grip in a minute, but this is just the body at the moment. So the body as it stands by itself will shoot at 8 frames per second with a mechanical shutter, 14 frames per second with the electronic shutter, and it will support continuous autofocus on both of those rates. Now, in terms of viewfinder lag, which is when you're following a subject as it goes past and you're panning to follow the action, this has always been something that mirrorless cameras have struggled with because they generally, at their faster speed, show you the last picture you took, not what's actually happening right now. And that's a bit weird. It makes you feel a little bit nauseous when you're following a subject and you're firing a burst, because it appears to either slow down or kind of go a bit faster, and you have to anticipate in a different way. But where it goes horribly wrong is where you're shooting something erratic, like a bird in flight, a football player, tennis player, a kid, a dog, anything that runs in one direction and then for some reason starts running in the other direction. Well, if you're following it and suddenly it changes direction and you have to go back again, you found that you've overshot. So this is something that DSLRs with their optical viewfinder always had an advantage, and it's something mirrorless camera manufacturers are trying to address. Sony have done it with the A6300 and the 6500 by slowing it down. It shoots at 11 frames per second, or if you slow it down to 8 frames per second, it will give you a kind of semi-live view, and it certainly helps. Fujifilm offers that on the XT2, but you'll need to slow it down from 8 to 5 frames per second. So when you shoot at 5, you are getting some sort of live feedback. I should also say the reason you wouldn't want to use the electronic shutter, it does suffer from rolling shutter artifacts where it can skew if the subject moves a lot while you're taking the picture, or you move a lot while you're panning. I was testing it, photographing a friend of mine cycling towards me. When he was cycling straight towards me, wasn't an issue using the electronic shutter, but as he went right past and I panned quickly to follow him, his head became elongated like an alien. And you can see that in my review at cameralabs.com. So long as you're aware of the issues, it does work. It will continuously AF, but you won't get much feedback and you will get rolling shutter artifacts. But here's the cool thing, right? Now, this is where I'm going to introduce an accessory. One of the best things about the XT2 is this accessory, which is the vertical power booster. This looks like a mild-mannered battery grip, which of course is what it is primarily. I'm just going to screw it on here. But it does so much more. Doug, while I'm attaching this, how much does the VPB cost?
The VPB is an additional $329 US. And I noticed that mirrorless cameras aren't small anymore once you do that, are they? They're now getting up there to be regular size cameras.
Well, you say that. It's still probably, even with the grip, about the size of a DSLR, a big pro DSLR without the grip.
I see you are holding it with your fingertips, so it's not that big.
Yeah, I mean, look, so I've got my full hand, I've not got huge hands, and look, it can still almost go all the way to the bottom. If this were a 5D or a D500 with a battery grip, it would go down much further. So it's still quite compact. So let's talk about this. So basically, if you add this grip to the XT2, and you will because it's brilliant, it brings the total price closer to about $2,000, which will introduce some interesting comparisons in a minute. Here's what it gives you. First of all, most obviously, portrait controls. When you turn it on its side, you get the shutter release, you get the clickable dials still, so you can hold it comfortably when shooting in the portrait orientation. It, of course, extends the battery life. Now, the way some battery grips do this is by inserting a stalk into the existing battery compartment. What that means is that the existing battery has to be removed. You can fit two in the grip, but you lose the one in the body, so you actually only double your battery life. With this, you triple the battery life because you can still use the battery in the body and the batteries within the grip itself. And they come out on a tray here. If you're watching the video, you can see the tray with two batteries inside it. And what's quite cool is when you switch the camera on, once you've attached the grip, in fact, I'll be able to show you, where is it there? You might see tiny little battery icons, but one for each battery. There's 3 little battery icons on the screen when you've got the grip attached. You may or may not be able to see that, but it's quite cute. And you can also get an accurate percentage from each of them. Now, the interesting thing is if you're filming 4K video without the grip, Fujifilm limits you to 10 minutes per clip to avoid overheating, because the battery gets super hot like most cameras do, and that in turn overheats the body, and it says, right, if it's cool enough you can keep recording afterwards. And I managed to record about 40 minutes worth, 4 10-minute clips with the body alone before it said, look, now I'm getting too hot now. Mount the battery grip though, and it's clever enough to say, you know what, if all the batteries are charged, let's use the ones in the grip before we use the one in the body. And what that means is it keeps the body cooler. Now, when these two run out, it will switch over to the one in the body, but it prioritizes the one in the base first. That allows the camera to keep cooler. Don't get me wrong, it still gets warm, but it allows it to extend the 4K recording times to half an hour per clip. And I recorded 5 of them in a row before all the batteries run out. So about 2.5 hours worth of 4K video. And the camera was quite warm, but it wasn't overheating. So I think it could have gone even further. As I alluded to earlier, well, I didn't allude, I actually said, it has a headphone jack on the side. So that movie makers are going to like that. But you'll also notice in that next to the headphone jack is there is another port, another jack, and that is for a supplied AC adapter. Now, that adapter will charge both batteries simultaneously inside the grip in about 2 hours. But here's the really cool thing. You can also power the battery off this adapter. So this grip is now also become an AC adapter. And I tried it, I removed all the batteries, all 3 batteries, and it still worked fine on AC power. So you can actually run this forever on AC power, which is brilliant. But that's not all. I sound like an infomercial. The XT2 has 2 performance modes, normal and boost, and the body itself also has this, but you'll see this little switch on the side of the grip that goes from normal to boost mode. When you switch this into boost mode, the extra battery power can overclock effectively the AF engine, and it actually becomes faster at focusing. The viewfinder blackout becomes lessened, so you see more image and less blackout. It becomes more responsive, so it kind of enhances all of these things, and it increases the mechanical shutter from 8 to 11 frames per second. Would you care to hear how that sounds, sir?
Yes, please.
Okay, let me switch that on to boost mode. Here we go.
I think every camera needs a switch that says boost or turbo. I want a button that says
Yes,
turbo.
exactly. Like the PCs. I
Yeah,
remember when I first got into PCs, there was the turbo button. You'd be like, why wouldn't I press that?
that's right.
Why wouldn't I just have that on all the time? So here it is at 8 frames per second. Okay, pretty good. Now let's have it at 11. You hear that?
That's great. It's just like the Marshall amp. You can turn it up to 11.
Exactly. So, this accessory does a massive amount of things. It triples your battery life. It triples your recording times. It gives you a headphone jack. It gives you AC power. It accelerates focusing, lag, response, and continuous shooting. And it gives you portrait controls. And it's $300. To me, it's the must-have accessory, whether you're shooting video or stills. It just makes things better. In my review at cameralabs.com, I tested the continuous autofocusing on this camera, all three of those burst rates at 8, 11, and 14 frames per second. And it can certainly track action, this camera. Now, I'm going to talk about autofocus because on the previous X-Trans 2 bodies, there was this little portion in the middle of the frame that had embedded phase detect AF points. And so long as you made sure that area was over your subject, it did a pretty good job at actually refocusing it, so long as you had the right kind of lens. Now, I'll get this caveat out of the way right now. It's the same with the XT2. Some people have criticized Fujifilm for this, but I think it applies to all systems. Some lenses focus faster than others in the system. There are some that are really slow. I mean, Canon owners, if you've ever had a 50mm 1.2 or the 85 1.2, you'll know they're not the world's fastest focusing lenses, are they? You're not going to use them for action. So it's not fair to criticize Fujifilm for this, but it is fair to point out what lenses you will need if you want decent action or wildlife performance. They are the lenses with LM at the end, primarily those two telephoto zooms I mentioned earlier, the XF 50 to 140 and the XF 100 to 400 millimeter. Those are the two lenses you're going to want right now if you're going to shoot action or wildlife with this camera, which, to be honest, you would be using anyway because they're the ideal focal length and focal ratio. So with X-Trans 3 on the X Pro 2 and the XT2, Fujifilm has greatly increased that phase detect area. Now, if you imagine if you will, the sensor. Draw a rectangle in your mind. This is the full sensor. Now do a thick border around the edge. Within that border is the autofocus coverage of this camera, but not all of it is phase detect, only a square in the middle. So imagine a square, that's the full height, but obviously it's square, so it doesn't go all the way out to the edges. So it's quite a large square, but it doesn't extend all the way to the left and right, and it doesn't quite touch the top and bottom. That is what you get on X-Trans 3, which is in the X Pro 2, and the XT2. And Fujifilm have embedded 169 phase detect AF points in there. And again, if you make sure your subject is within there, you stand a pretty good chance of keeping it in focus. There are zone modes, which work very well. And there's also tracking modes, which can work well depending on the subject. I found with birds, if it locked on to them, you were generally all right, but it didn't always lock on. With predictable action, like my friend cycling towards me, even quickly, that was very successful. That was almost 100% hit rate. But like I say, birds in flight were less so. And it reminded me of when I tested the Nikon D500, which seemed to not have any problems at all, regardless of what you were pointing it at. If it was on the frame, if it was in the frame, it would focus on it. That was it. I never once had a situation where it went, oh no, I've missed it. If it was there and you half pressed the shutter, it got it. Whereas with the XT2, especially in those kind of random situations with birds, even with one of those fast lenses, it was maybe 70% of the time it would definitely get it. And the other 30% of the time, it was a bit of a crapshoot. Sometimes it would, sometimes it wouldn't. And this leads me to conclude for it that in terms of continuous autofocus, it is much better than its predecessor, much better. And over the X Pro 2, it also has customizable continuous autofocus profile. So you can say, prioritize the system for suddenly appearing objects or objects that are going to go behind, say, a wall, like a bird flying behind a tree. And it was really good at doing that. So those modes definitely work. But it wasn't the 100% confidence and consistency that a professional sports shooter will want, or even just somebody who's an extremely enthusiastic sports shooter. For them, I still found the best model in its class is the D500 from Nikon, which is about $2,000, which interestingly is about the price of the XT2 with its grip. The D500 shooting at 10 frames per second, very confidently and consistently. So to put it in perspective, the XT2 is a huge upgrade in autofocus over its predecessor. Huge, right? It's brilliant, but it's not as confident and consistent as a top-end Pro DSLR at the same price point. So that already is one of its kind of weaknesses that could lead us, if you like, into some other comparisons.
Well, like you say, a great general purpose camera, not as good as the X Pro 2 for street, not as good as the D500 for sports and action, but a very good camera, obviously. A couple of things on my notes here I want to make sure we cover. Wi-Fi and GPS.
Yes, so it's got pretty much the same Wi-Fi implementation as its predecessors. It doesn't have NFC, so there's going to be no holding your phone to the side of it to try and establish that connection. But it's pretty easy. I never had any dropped links or anything like that. It offers pretty good remote control with your smartphone, full manual control. You can, when you're composing stills remotely with your smartphone, tap the screen on your phone to change the focusing area and go, ooh, this is how life could be if I had a touch screen. But unfortunately, they disable that feature when it's filming video. You can remotely trigger video, but you can't remotely focus video, which is a little bit frustrating. You can copy images over, no problem. You can tether to a computer now, but they'll charge you about $70 for a plugin that works with Lightroom, and it only works over USB. So the experience is going to be good, but you're not going to have a wireless experience with that. Now, Canon have really led the way with that, because the EOS utility, which I've always said is one of the highlights of having a Canon DSLR or mirrorless camera, is this EOS utility that works on wired or wireless connections, and it offers absolute control. I mean, you can manually focus with different speeds, you can magnify, you can do all sorts. It's really, really powerful. So you can do it with a wire if you buy the plugin, but you can't do it over wireless with a computer. But you can do it with your phone. The way the GPS works is quite interesting. Again, like its predecessors, what most phones do is they capture a log that you synchronize later on. So it does lots of images at a time. The way Fujifilm does it is a bit like the way Nikon does it with SnapBridge, is it actually maintains a live link with the phone. So what you do is you get the two devices talking to each other, you turn on the location, I'm not going to say logging because it's not logging it, but you turn on the location gathering feature. And then what happens is your phone makes that information available to the camera if the camera is on or wants it over the next hour. And you'll know that it's working because you'll see a little globe icon on the screen of the XT2. And if you can see that, it means it's going to embed whatever GPS coordinates your phone is pumping out at that moment. So it works pretty well. And when you get towards the end of that hour, it says, look, do you want to go for a bit longer? Or is that enough? So it does work well. And even though it would suggest to you that it's maintaining a kind of high power Wi-Fi link, it does it in a sufficiently intelligent manner that it doesn't seem to hit the battery life significantly. Certainly no more so than filming video or transferring pictures. You don't go, don't shoot with the GPS feature, it's going to ruin your battery, because it does work well. And remember, you can obviously also top up over USB or use the battery grip and triple your battery life and get 1,000 frames out of it.
You know, one question I get, maybe not surprisingly, but fairly often, is with this camera, should I buy it body only or with the kit lens? Do you know which lenses come with this camera if you buy it with the kit lens, and what do you think of them?
I think, well, it depends on the region, because every region does it differently. I think because it's sufficiently high-end, it may not be available in a kit in a lot of regions, which is great because it means you can go out and buy whichever lens you want. I would say the lens I have on here is the XF 35mm f2. This lens is a no-brainer for any Fujifilm owner. It's faster and quieter and better quality than the original 35f 1.4, and to be honest, you will notice very little difference in terms of depth of field. Even though there's a whole stock difference, you don't actually see that much. You don't believe me? Look at my review of this camera at cameralens.com of this lens. I did side-by-side comparisons. There's not a lot in it. What you do get is faster, quieter focusing. You get weather resistance. You get a lens that is smaller as well, and is pretty affordable. It's very affordable. So I would get this. It's equivalent to like a 50mm. As a landscape and architecture shooter, I love the 10-24. That would be those two lenses live on this camera for me. I will give you a little beware of the 18 to 55 millimeter. They do a really upmarket 18 to 55 Fujifilm. It's f2.8 to 4, so it's slightly brighter than the typical 3.5 to 5.6. It's very sharp in the corners at all focal lengths. You know, that slightly brighter focal ratio does let you achieve some shallow depth of field effects. Everything is good until you start filming video with it. And I've noticed it might only be with the samples that I've tried, but I'm going to tell you anyway. On the samples that I've tried of this lens, if you've got it zoomed about halfway through, up to the longer end, up to the 55 end, when you film video, there's this weird kind of shimmering effect. It doesn't matter whether you've got stabilization enabled or not. It's weird, like, you know, in Scooby-Doo, when they talk about, do you remember when that thing happened? And they do that, like they did in Waynesville. You know, they do that kind of shimmer from
It's like
side to side.
beginning of a dream sequence lead in, right?
Exactly right, exactly right. Hey, Doug, do you remember when we were at college, that time that dude came in? Shimmer, shimmer, shimmer. A bit like that, except it's actually happening on your video. And you're like, what is going on? I've only ever seen it happen on one lens. It's the 18 to 55. I've seen it happen on more than one copy of that lens. Only affects video, only affects this sort of second half of the focal range. So I'd steer clear of that if you intend to shoot video on any Fuji body. I've seen this on the XT10. I've seen it on the XT1 as well. It's not exclusive to the XT2. So beware of that lens, which is a shame because it is a nice general purpose lens and it has optical stabilization. But for me, it's all about the primes, apart from the zoom I mentioned. The 10 to 24, no-brainer. The 35 f2 is great. The 56 1.2 is another favorite. Those are my three go-to lenses. I know I said I only had two. It's now gone to three. Oh, and a fourth one. If you're into action, get the 50 to 140. It's really nice. Oh, there's a few things I want to say that it doesn't do. So here are the things it can't do. Doesn't have a touch screen, doesn't have built-in stabilization, doesn't have a flat profile when you're recording to an SD card. Here are a couple of weird things. It only has 3-frame AEB. You already know about those. Here are some weirder ones. It has a leveling gauge, like most cameras do. It shows you when you've got it level. It's only single axis. What's up with that? Virtually all cameras, including point-and-shoot cameras, have got dual-axis leveling gauges. Why is it only a single-axis gauge? This has been, again, on the Fuji cameras for a while. I don't know. So it doesn't have a dual-axis leveling gauge.
So while we're talking about autofocus, does this camera have face detection?
Yeah, so face as in what's in front of my head. Yes, it does have face detection and eye detection, and they work very well in single autofocus modes, but less well in continuous autofocus modes. And the reason for that is that the software that drives the face detection on this camera only works with the contrast-based AF system. It does not work with the phase detect AF system, which means it doesn't work very well in continuous autofocus. In fact, they disable the eye detection altogether, and the face detection doesn't work as well. So if your subject is moving, it's not going to do a great job with face detection. But if they're still, and I've shot many portraits of my kids who are, you know, they're pretty good at staying still, but you know, they still fidget a bit, and I've shot them with the 56 1.2, which is a very shallow depth of field, and the face and eye detection work really well, but it's really for single AF use only. Again, Sony has really nailed that on on most of its cameras, which have eye detection in continuous autofocus and with phase detection. And again, you know, when we're comparing it against other cameras, the A6300, well, the A6000, A6300 and A6500 have got phase detect over almost the entire sensor, not just in a big square, almost the entire sensor, and it works with the face detection, and on the more recent models with eye detection as well. Auto ISO, which is something I used to scoff at and now use all the time, I love auto ISO, is annoyingly not focal length aware on this. So you know how in auto ISO you can normally set a minimum shutter speed, say if you don't want to go below a 30th of a second. Well, I can hold 30th of a second just about with this lens, but I can't with a 200mm, and I can easily do it with an ultra wide. So I want the camera to be aware of what focal length lens I have on it. Some of them are focal length aware and can automatically increase that minimum shutter speed if you put a longer lens on it. Fujifilm can't, and again, for a camera of this class, I would expect focal length aware auto ISO. But that's it. I'm looking at my notes here, and those are, you'll notice that most of those could actually be fixed with the firmware update. The things that cannot be fixed are the touch screen and the lack of built-in stabilization. You will never get them on the XT2. And those are the two big negative marks. But there's so much positive about this camera, and I absolutely adore shooting with it. It has kind of become my go-to camera. I used to shoot with the XT1 all the time, and I really love a lot of the things that they've done here. You know, not just the new features like the 4K video, but the buttons, the improved controls that I've said. You know, the autofocus, the better handling. This grip has been a revelation because it really turns it into a high performance camera. But if I don't need the fastest burst shooting or autofocus, and if I'm okay with just, you know, a normal single battery life wise, I just remove it and suddenly I've got a smaller camera again, you know, a smaller lighter camera, and the grip can go away. So the grip is a really clever way of upgrading the performance in a way that you can kind of add it at a later date or take it away if you don't want it when you're going out and shooting different things. So it's a really clever way of implementing that. So I think Fujifilm should be commended for that.
Oh, very good. I think you've sold everybody on the grip. So it's a camera that comes in just a touch under $2,000 US if you get it with the grip. Sounds like a nice, a great package. I guess to summarize, I would say this is a great camera for people who want really superior image quality, particularly if they want out-of-camera JPEGs with these marvelous film simulations that all the Fuji cameras have. Some of the controls that you and I both think are some of the best in the industry, the nicest cameras to shoot with, a terrific electronic viewfinder. That's sort of and a good general purpose camera. I think that's the way to sort of summarize this one.
And certainly it's very good at video and it is very good at action. It's just not the best at action. So certainly for most of what I do, if it's not critical, if you have another chance to get the picture, you know, so if the person's coming around again, you know, the bird's coming around again, you will get it, but you might not get it first time. If you need to get it first time, if you're a professional shooting, you know, you're making money from you know, shooting sports or wildlife, then I would think twice about it and go for something like a D500. But it's amazing how many things this camera can do extremely well. And it's also amazing how far this system has progressed. You know, since the first generation, since the original X Pro 1 and then X Trans 2 made so many improvements. And now, isn't it amazing that a system that launched with autofocus that was appalling, to be frank, on the X Pro 1, I mean, it was horrendous, to a point where we're now actually having a conversation to say under what specific conditions will a D500 or a Sony A6000 series beat it, under what conditions. You know, it's actually competing with those guys now. It's up at that kind of level. Then it just shows you, and again with the video, how far they've gone without taking their eye from the ball of the ergonomics and the handling and the image quality that drew us all to the X system in the first place. So I think as a kind of not, you know, as an upgrade and as a general purpose body, it's a triumph. And if you are interested in it, you know, please do check out my review at Camera Labs.
Okay, so I've got 4 comparable cameras I'm going to mention very quickly. I just want you to give me a 1-sentence comparison. Okay, let's look first. We've talked a lot about the Nikon D500, which the camera itself is $200 more. The Nikon is $200 more. Again, you said sports for the D500 or action. Anything else to say about that comparison?
Yeah, it shoots at 10 frames per second with feedback in the viewfinder, extremely confident, consistent autofocus. It's a great general purpose body as well. It films good quality 4K, but with quite a tight crop, 1.5 times on what, lest we forget, is already a 1.5 times crop sensor. So it is pretty tight for video, but it does look good. The downside, you know, is that there's no silent mode. It's quite big, it's heavy, blah, blah, blah. All of those DSLR versus mirrorless questions. But it's definitely a contender at this price.
Okay. Also, DSLR, how about the Canon 7D Mark II, which is $100 less expensive than this camera?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because that camera's aging now. If you're thinking about the Canon 7D Mark II, I'd fully urge you to go for a Nikon D500 instead. Although, if you've got an existing investment in Canon lenses, it is Canon's top-end APS-C camera at the moment. The 80D is much more modern, though. It's not going to shoot as fast or, you know, as confidently, but 7D Mark II is getting on a bit now. It's still a good camera, but it's, you know, it's lacking in a number of features. Okay,
now in Sony APS-C, we have the 6300, which you can buy now, and it's $600 less expensive than this. The 6300 comes in just under $1,000 US, and the Sony A6500, at the moment when we're recording this, the 6500 isn't available yet, but that camera is going to be, even then, $200 less expensive than this Fujifilm. What about that comparison?
Well, as we know from reviewing the Sonys before, they are triumphant at autofocus in the mirrorless world. They have that full coverage across the entire frame with phase detect and loads of phase detect AF points. It's consistent, it's confident. If you're shooting action and you want if you want the smallest, lightest body for shooting consistently high-end action, those two Sony bodies are the way to go. The difference between the 65 and the 6300 is that the 65 gives you built-in stabilization, and it also gives you a touch screen. They both also film 4K video with no crop at all, so long as it's in 24-25p. If you film in 30p, it does apply a mild crop. But if you shoot in 24-25, you don't get a crop, so you get slightly better coverage compared to the XT2, the 5D Mark IV, and especially the D500 that has a really tight crop.
Okay, and the last one is an interesting comparison because it's a slightly smaller sensor, but you did this comparison online. The Olympus EM1 Mark II, which is $2,000 even, pretty much, so it's a little more expensive, and the smaller sensor. It's an interesting comparison there, isn't it?
Yeah, Olympus has really raised the bar on pricing there, on what anyone has been able to charge for a Micro Four Thirds camera. And of course, the conversation will always be, but it's a smaller sensor. It's a smaller sensor. But as we've discussed many times before, the smaller sensor has its benefits. It means that you can have really high quality lenses that perform brilliantly into the corners that aren't huge and heavy. Although they have been relatively expensive of late, some of the higher end lenses. It's an interesting one because I've not tested it properly yet. I'm going to be testing it very, very soon. I'm going to be making lots of comparisons. So check cameralabs.com for the latest news on the EM1 Mark II and how it compares to these other bodies. But just briefly, it will shoot at 18 frames per second with continuous AF with an electronic shutter. It's slow with the mechanical shutter. Does have dual memory card slots. It's very weatherproof. It's got big buttons. I've handled one. It feels really nice. The stabilization is ridiculous. It's insanely good. It's even better than before. So it's got all of those things in its favor. It also films 4K and UHD or Cinema 4K. So, you know, it's got a lot going for it. But it is $2,000 and it is Micro Four Thirds. So the performance on this camera is going to have to be extraordinarily good. It's going to have to the continuous AF on this camera, because remember at $2,000 that's more than a Nikon D500. Yeah. That's what it's up against really at that price point. You see, that's a nice thing about what Fujifilm have done here, is that they've gone, look, we can hit a lower price point, but if you want to turn it into a higher end camera, you can add this, but that then brings it up to the $2,000 point. But without the grip, it's hitting a more comfortable price point. It's still not a cheap camera by any means, but is comfortably below those bodies. So the EM1 Mark II is going to be a very, very interesting camera. I cannot wait to test it and tell you all about it.
Very good. Well, Gordon, you continue to impress me with the thoroughness of your knowledge, because we didn't discuss ahead of time some of the questions I was going to throw at you, and you had all the answers. Very impressed. So everyone, if you want to learn even more about the Fujifilm XT2, and I'm saying literally more than you ever wanted to know, go over to cameralabs.com, read Gordon's in-depth review. It's going to take you at least one beer and probably 2 glasses of wine to get through it, but it's literally extremely thorough, and I think you'll learn a tremendous amount about this camera. And as always, if you're interested in purchasing this camera, or any camera, or for that matter, anything that you might want to purchase online, go over to cameralabs.com, click on the Buy Now links. If you get yourself into Amazon, for example, and you decide there's something else you want to buy, that's great, because you're going to help Gordon put food on the table. Actually, you're going to help him buy coffee for his coffee press. That's the most important thing. You can also go to cameralabs.com and you can buy Gordon a cup of coffee. It's just that easy. But
even better.
Yeah, because without the coffee, we cannot do this show. I've got to tell you, folks. So that's how we pay the bills. Head over to cameralabs.com, enjoy a terrifically detailed review, and help Gordon buy some coffee for himself.
And conversely, Doug, before you end, Doug is a fantastic street photographer, and he is such a nice guy. I cannot think of anyone you'd want to spend time with more than this dude here. And you can spend time with him and shoot with him by going on one of his workshops, and you can find out about those. He's a specialist in Cuba and street photography, and you can find out about all of his workshops at dougk.com. Have I got that right, Doug?
You certainly do. Thank you so much. And Gordon, with that, I'll say thank you, and I look forward to another review here on Camera Labs. Bye-bye.
See you.